Hallelujah. We're so excited. I'm Anna Kate, your host, but I have my co-host here, Ruth, who's joining us from California, the great state of California, the free state of Florida. We have this amazing program we're starting called Freedom Watchers, right? We're freedom watching what's happening in the country, around the world, but also in the spirit realm as well. Ruth, it's so good to see you here. How are you?
I'm doing great by God's grace. How's ever you there in Florida?
Florida is amazing. It's a little chilly right now, but it is always amazing in this free state. We are so excited to introduce the other co-host of this show. And I'm telling you right now, this man really needs no introduction, although God prophesied he's going to have a film about his life on everything that he's been through. So we're going to introduce Larry Ballard, who is a Christian. He's a patriot. God put it on his heart to start traveling the world, not just this country, the world, and doing hands-on research on what's happening in different nations. He actually has a book out called The Liberty Crusade. And he's so fascinating. I mean, when I talk about hands-on research, I'm going to have him go into it. But Larry, let's get you in here. And I want you to talk about your background. What got you traveling all over the world, doing hands-on research, and then writing this book? What is your background? Why did you start investigating the truth?
Well, it's a God thing. Basically, I was in college. I went on a motorcycle ride, had an accident, careened over a cliff, ran headlong into a tree, was unconscious for 4 hours. And when I woke up, I had visited God. And he gave me an assignment that he said was going to last my entire life. He said, I'm going to prepare you for your entire life. You're going to travel all over the world. You're going to have a number of strategically significant jobs. You're to read the Bible, the Quran. You're to read history, especially history, anthropology, archaeology, sociology, climatology, you name it, and I'm going to prepare you. So basically, the job history. I worked for Monsanto Chemical Company. Why? So I could learn about GMOs. Going through college, I worked building skyscrapers. Why? Because come 9/11, I was going to find out that I knew something that most people didn't know. I had worked with something called thermite, which burns at 4,500 degrees. And folks, that is exactly how they took those towers down. Those planes didn't take that tower down. Those towers, that flame burns at about 1,250 degrees, not anywhere even as hot as your stove. So basically, I learned that. I worked for Atomic Energy of Canada. And what did I learn there? That was under socialized medicine. So I saw people who had cancer who died before they ever got in to see a doctor. And I was also there working in the nuclear power industry, where I got a chance to learn about the significance of energy in terms of it being a control mechanism. I worked for CGR Mev out of Paris, France. And why did God put me there? Because at that time they were forming the European Union, and all the ministers thought, well, this is going to be the 10-horned beast out of the Bible. Well, it wasn't, because now there's 29. Now with Brexit, with England exiting, there's 28 nations. So basically that was put together as initially a trading bloc. And then it became a common currency. And then they had a vote, and some of the nations said, we don't want a constitution under Brussels. But they said, we don't care. We're going to give you one anyway. Mm-hmm. So I saw that form. And then I had a patent that took me to China at just exactly the right time. I was in Tiananmen Square 2 weeks before the Tiananmen Square massacre. And I probably talked to some of those kids that were killed. But what I got to do that most people don't is, because I was there to get tool and die making done, I actually got to see some sweatshops. And I decided not to have my stuff done there because I knew what they were going to do. And sure enough, they did. What happened is they came back, and anybody who had their dies made there, the government subsidized it to where no American corporation could compete. But then they made a second die for themselves. And that's how they began to get control of our manufacturing, because they were stealing our intellectual properties. So that was basically the travel portion of it. And then God said, this is going to be a long journey. So I'm going to make sure that you understand that I've got your back. So he said, you're going to have a number of accidents that should by all rights kill you. You're going to walk away from every one of them unscathed. So real quickly, I was working in construction on high rises. I fell from the 5th floor. My foot caught. I never hit the ground. That was accident number 1. Accident number 2, I was down in the lower level of a high rise, and the 3 stories above me, the floor collapsed and fell on me, and I was okay, and then I was in a cave accident, and there's a scar right here. That's where that big artery is. Should have killed me. I bled, but when they got to the hospital, they hit it with a swab, and it burst. The artery burst in the emergency room. And then I'll fast forward. I was in a car accident, and I jumped in the back seat, and the engine ended up where I was sitting. And then finally, I passed. I was on the Blue Goose out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a twin engine prop. We took off, and the engine blew. It caught on fire. People were panicking, just going crazy. And God said, "This is it. Stand up." I stood up, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. God says not one person is going to be injured. And I sat back down. People were crying. They were screaming. And right as we got to the runway, the plane was at about a 20-degree angle. The pilot flipped the wing. We landed. We bounced down the runway. They had foam on the runway. All the planes were out. It was on the front page of the newspaper the next day. But when I got off that plane, everybody applauded because they knew they had just had a divine appointment with God. And that basically set me on the path. So I studied the rest of my life, and I got into a routine where I would pray. And at 5 to 5:15 in the morning, God would wake me up, and he'd said, "This is what you got to study next. This is where you're going." So this entire book, not one chapter in that book, was written before God gave me the instructions as to what to do and what I needed to learn. And what it is and why it's unique, it's first and foremost a history book. It's a history book about America and the world, but it also is grounded in the Bible, and it's also grounded in my real world experiences. So it's not just some egghead telling you what happened. It's somebody who lived
You
through
actually
all
went
of these
there.
things.
Right. So Larry, you actually moved to these countries, got a job there, and investigated hands-on, and you talked to people, interviewed people face to face. This is not just something you researched online, although there's great info online. This is hands-on research.
Yes.
And Ruth is very much
I would call it more life experiences.
Okay, life experiences. And so Ruth, she's a pastor. She's also very prophetic. And what's amazing meeting both of you and having both of you here in this Freedom Watchers panel and show is that you'll get downloads, Larry, from God, and then you investigate in the natural realm, in the physical realm. And then Ruth will get a download from the Lord. And when you guys met, she told me, this guy, Larry, he's saying exactly what the Lord told me decades ago. Ruth, can you jump in and share about that? Oh, you're muted.
We were in the media room in Missouri, Reawaken America. He's not supposed to be inside the room because he's not a speaker, but someone allowed him to go, Amy, I believe. And then when I saw him, I said, "Oh my gosh!" I said, "You have so much in you that it's like your entire life. It's like you need. It has to be put in film, TV. It has to be broadcast because God has deposited so much in you." I mean, we didn't even know each other's name, really. It's just the Holy Ghost just introduced. And then God said, connect with him. Do a weekly with the young patriots and also with the adults. Because just like I said, so many years, the Lord has shown us in the spirit what's happening. So, like, let's say, I will ask God, Lord, is you and yours? God said, no. Is WHO yours? God said, no. So, I mean, he'll tell me all this, and so with my husband. I mean, my husband is also like Larry, where he has so much in the history and so much in the current news. But I'm not, I just have that supernatural, God will speak to me in that way and through the word of God. And now what he's saying, God has been speaking to us for the last 21 years. 21 years. So now it's happening, it's fulfillment time. That's why he's converging all of us. That's why I feel like I've known him. He's been waiting for this for 52 years. And for me, 31 years. And of course, daughter Anna is also waiting for this for the time that she knew deep inside, wow, this is something that is like divinely converging, the third heaven and the earthly together as one to help all the nations.
And that's why, being a freedom watcher, it's watching the wall, watching for our enemies. And obviously, as you know, Larry, and you wrote in your book, I mean, we have enemies, foreign and domestic. They are in-house grown, infiltrated. In the back of your book, you talk about, the book identifies the enemy who seeks to control America and every sovereign nation. You talk about, you lay out the global elite strategy to enslave us all. Why don't you get into, and I know a lot of people, especially my viewers on Twitter and on YouTube, you guys are well aware of who the elite is, but for those that may not be aware, for those that are strolling on, YouTube right now, and they're like, what is this Freedom Watchers? What is the global elite when you talk about the global elite with your research that you've done?
If you'll allow me to, I want to say one thing first.
Sure.
I'm going to tell you who the global elite are in detail, but the message that I think God gave me is history and all the tipping points in history that have changed the world. And what I think is missing is, if you know what's in this book, you can insert yourself into any single solitary daily event in the news, and you can understand what's causing it. What's missing is people are focusing on the event of the day. They don't know that it might have 4 or 5 interlacing pieces that might go back 50 years. And what's missing is they don't understand that this is a war. So basically, one of the books that I read that was the most important to me was The Art of War. And it happens to be Donald Trump's favorite book. And it tells you how to defeat an enemy. So what I want to bring forward here before we talk about who the global elite are is that they are our enemy, and we have to defeat them, and we have to know how to defeat them. So if we're going to defeat them, the first thing we got to know is who are they?
Who is their enemy?
We got to know what is their agenda, what
Yes.
motivates them, why do they want to take us down, how are they planning on taking us down, what have they done to us in the past, and what can we learn from all of their associated efforts, so that what we want to do is get so much in their head that we know them as well as we know ourselves. And when we do that, we can anticipate what they're going to do. We can determine a strategy to defeat them. And later in this interview, or if not this one, the next one, I'll show you how I've learned exactly what they do and how the events are unfolding right now, where we're soon going to get control of the money, which is their lever of power. And we're going to be able to do exactly to them what they've done to us. So now, if you don't mind, I'll answer your question.
Please.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. This is great.
Who are the global elite?
Yes.
Well, they're a group of powerful men, and you have to understand the lever of power. So where do they get their power? If you don't understand that, you can't understand who they are and what they're able to do. So they control money. So what is the source of money? This is the source of the rise and fall of every nation in the world and of the global elite. They have to control the natural resources of the world, God's natural resources. They have to control the manufacturing. They have to control the trade. So those assets are then sold to create the wealth of the world. And that's why England was the superpower of the world, because at one time they controlled that. Then America controlled it. Now China is attempting to take control, but a hint, in the next video, we'll talk about why that's not going to happen. China is going to fall, and it's going to fall relatively soon. So basically, who are the global elite? They are a group of people who found out how to get the money. How did they get the money? Those things I just mentioned are a big part of it. But before they got to that, they had to learn something else. There was a war, the 100-Year War with Britain and France. And at the end of that war, Britain went bankrupt. And they went to a nemesis, the Rothschilds, and said, would you loan us some money? And the Rothschilds said, oh, sure, we'll loan you as much as you want. But we have one little hint, one little hitch. We're going to print your money from now till perpetuity. That birthed the first central bank of the world. So these people are smart. What did they learn? If we cause a war, if we finance both sides of that war, we can drive those nations into debt. And when we drive them into debt, we can put them into the global network of central banks. And Stalin said, if you can install a central bank in a nation, that's 90% of installing communism. So basically, in modern nomenclature, we're dealing with communism. But when it started, when this all began, it was in England and Europe with the feudal kings. And feudalism is just another name for communism. The kings controlled everything. You couldn't control land. You had no freedom. You basically were a serf that did what the king said, or you were thrown in jail. So that's why our founding fathers came here, to get out from under that system. So basically, they're here now. They've got the money. They've got control. And what do they do with that money? They buy power. So that's how we lose our government. Once they get control of that money and control of the global financial system, then they can buy your politicians, and they do. Then they can buy your educators, and they do. They can buy the media, and they do. So who are the global elite? It might be your next door neighbor. It's basically anyone who they found was smart and intelligent, who would agree to further their agenda if they educated them, financed them, and put them in a position of power. Now, beyond that, though, they needed a superstructure if they were going to control the entire world, which is what their goal is. So they tried 3 different times to get the UN. The first time they failed. The second time was after World War I. Wars are important to them. They tried to form the League of Nations. That didn't pass. So along came World War II, and they got the UN. And the UN is the global governance body that they use to control us with their money. So at the top of that is a group called the Bilderberg, or you call it the 13 families. There's multiple names, but just think of it as the wealthiest people in the world. And they control, within the confines of the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of Settlements, and with that, they control third world nations. Remember, resources are what's important. So what they do is they go out and say, oh, Brazil, you've got a load of natural resources, but you need a harbor. We'll build that for you, and you'll fine. We'll build your infrastructure. But they make sure that the infrastructure project fails, and then they take their natural resources. So the process just goes over. They take the natural resources, they steal them, they convert that eventually into finished goods and into money, and they control. So that's the banking system that's embedded within the UN. Then also there's the World Health Organization. And I think we've kind of encountered that lately with a certain pandemic that's been floating around. And we maybe feel like they've controlled us a little bit. But then we go back to the genesis of our conversation, which is the World Trade Organization. Because he who controls trade controls the world, because that trade is converted into money, which buys power. Now, this is a living organism. So that's the power structure at the top. At the bottom, there's a saying that the organized minority will always defeat the unorganized majority. Well, why is that? That means we lose every time. Why? Because we don't have the money. They have the money. So here's what they do. There's an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations, an organization called the Trilateral Commission. It just so happens that they're committed to ending all sovereign nations and creating a one world government. And it just turns out that literally anybody in Washington belongs to one of those subversive organizations. And then we've got our media that Donald Trump calls the fake news. So they buy the talking heads, the bobbling heads who say what they're supposed to say. And then we've got the Fed, which is a central bank that controls the money. And then we've got corporations. And Lincoln said that he feared for this nation because the day would come when the merger of banks and corporations would create a corporatocracy that would so control the economy that the general public would have no rights whatsoever. Then you got academia, so they buy our universities by giving multi-billion-dollar endowments to, let's say, Harvard. Harvard was founded by the founders of this country so that the people could learn to read, so they could do what? Read the Bible. And now it has something like a $40 billion endowment, and a lot of that came from Muslim nations, not Christian nations. And then you've got you.
Oh, I think his audio. Larry, your audio cut. Can you hear us? For some reason, your audio went out. Interesting how it only went out on him, on Larry, who's talking about the truth of the world. Okay, and now you can unmute it. It's weird. You were unmuted and we lost you mid-sentence.
Can you hear? How much didn't you hear?
The last 2-3 sentences. Just
okay.
Repeat that.
So basically what we've got is there's people on the ground. Yeah. And they're the feet on the ground that are controlling us. And basically they get paid to go out and do community organizing to make a narrative that defeats us. So what they do is they go out and they protest. And let's take, for example, Barack Obama's involvement in the gay rights movement. They were going nowhere. So they went out and they had their protest, then paid media people, filmed those protests and made it look like it was bigger than it was. And then Barack Obama stepped in and said, the mandate of the people is that we have the right for gay people to marry. And so they do that with guns. They do that with the climate, with everything you can think of. They basically buy people to create a narrative that allows the media to step in and promote that narrative, and allows the people at the top in Washington to come in and mandate that, saying it's the will of the people, when in fact, it's the will of a very, very small minority of paid for people like Black Lives Matter. So basically, you might be living next door to a college professor. You might be living next door to a congressman or a senator or to a CEO of a corporation. Any of those people might be bought and paid for and part of the global elite. So the only criteria you have is if you have accepted money and agreed to put forth their narrative, you're part of the global elite. You may be on the ground floor as one of the feet on the ground, or you may be up at the very top. So it can be anybody who has sold out this country and sold out Christianity and sold out freedom. That's the global elite.
Wow. And you know, I love that you talk about, in order to identify, in order to combat our enemy, we first have to identify who our enemy is. And so thank you for explaining the you know, who the global elite is. But we talked about the enemy. What is the source of their power? You talked about, right, trade and money and infiltration, but anything else that you want to jump in there? And Ruth, I know she's got questions as well.
Well, it is money. With money, you can buy power and influence in any stratum of society. They buy the politicians, they buy the corporate leaders, they buy the media, they buy everybody. If you take away their power, you take away their money. Money is what makes them powerful. And they work behind the scenes. That's another thing that gives them power. So let me digress into history and tell you how they got that lock on that power. In 1933, America went bankrupt. And I guarantee you, very few people know what I'm about to tell you. In the congressional record of the United States of America, it says that in 1933, the U.S. in the depths of the Depression declared bankruptcy. The receivers of the bankruptcy, the central banking system, took over the United States. And it says in our congressional record, as of this date, all federal offices and all federal officers are existing in name only. The United States, get ready for this, is no longer a republic, which is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The United States is now a democracy, and our founding fathers called democracy mobocracy. Why? Because it's the vote of the majority. And once somebody who's least willing or least able to work finds out that they can get handouts from the Treasury, then we start to go into massive debt. And debt is one of the things they use to control us. So right now, we're at the very tipping point of the close of a cycle where what we're going to see is we're going to see a collapse. Right now, Britain is on the brink of collapse. Japan's on the brink of collapse. Believe it or not, China's on the brink of collapse. This entire financial system is just about to come down. And what we're going to see is, are the bad guys going to win, or are the good guys going to win? And what's triggering it is, from COVID, every nation got a dose of debt up to their noses. They can't take any more. We're the world's reserve currency. So we're somewhat immune to that debt because we can run our printing presses 24/7 with minimal exposure. So basically what's happening is the Fed, on cue, stepped in to raise the interest rates. Well, now these other nations are not in a position to absorb that, so they're keeping their interest rates down. So that resulted in a crisis in England a few weeks ago and a crisis in Japan a couple of months ago. So what's happening is they have to buy US dollars in order to buy oil and other international commodities because we're the world's reserve currency. Well, now their currency is devalued. So just take Japan, for example. In order to buy that dollar, to buy that oil, it now costs them 40% more than it did 2 months ago. So it's driving these nations into debt. So what do they have to do? Every nation runs on interest. Those nations keep our treasury bonds in order, our sovereign debt, which is our treasury bonds, in order to sell them to buy the oil and other commodities they need. So now they're being forced to sell them at an accelerated rate, and they're not buying new ones. So what that is doing is creating the cycle that's going to create the tipping point that's going to see governments fall. So what's going to happen is now a flood of treasury bills are going to come back into the United States. And finally, that's going to drive the dollar down. And that's when everything is going to collapse. So we're, in my opinion, within months of the global reset that everybody talks about, and it's going to be caused by debt. So if I answer your question, they control money and drive us into debt. And debt is the final thing they use to trigger whatever they want to do to take over the world.
And Ruth, you have seen that from the supernatural realm. The Lord has shown you the collapse that's coming. Would you talk about what you've seen?
Okay.
That backs up these investigations.
Well, yeah, actually, and he also worked. He didn't just go there to investigate. He worked inside, so he saw everything and experienced everything. And for us as well, we work in the spiritual realm. So when the Lord showed us there's a real enemy, okay, the enemy of our soul is the devil. Whether you believe God or not, that's the reason why we all got connected right now for such a time as this. Because when we always gonna talk about the enemy, what's our natural response is to be mad, to be angry, war. There will always be a war. What did he say? That's what the devil wants. That's what the global elites wants. That's so that those countries will be in debt. And then you will what? You, those who have the heart of the love of money. Okay, the love of money is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6:10. So that's why there is a spiritual realm that is happening through all these centuries, from the beginning of time, from the Garden of Eden. So for the last 31 years, the Lord has shown us, thank God. I was telling, Anna and Larry that thank God that our training was in the spiritual realm, because if I knew who are the global elites from day one, I mean, I met kids at 12 years old, 10 years old, in both sides. They are so passionately mad at the other side. The other side is mad at, they're like 10 years old, 9 years old. There's even like 2-year-old carrying, a poster how they hate this person because they happen to be right.
FJB, yeah,
Yes, babies, kids. So I'm saying, my God, I said in the natural realm, I said what we're talking about is real. This is real. It's a fact. But then at the same token, okay, we know the problem. What is the solution? And that's why the spiritual realm is the solution. It means the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ is what? To honor all men, respect all men, and really fear God. When you fear God, you honor everybody. Whether they're atheists, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, you honor them, you respect them, you share what you have. See, and that's what one of the solutions. So when the Lord showed me this, in fact, before the global elites thing that I because I don't watch things so that I don't want to be kind of like corrupted by whatever side it is. The Lord will just show me. And then when I saw different countries and that it's against against us, but there's also some allies of US. I said, wow, what is this, Lord? There will be millions. It's going to be a domino effect. I said, there will be domino effect of failure for those whose heart is towards killing humanity. See, because why? They have the love of money, which is the root of all evil. So the devil is working at hand on their lives. See, it's one thing to have money. Everybody, money is a tool to help people. But the moment you start loving money than people, that's dangerous. You'll come to a point that the enemy can use you and you can abuse your power. It becomes a tyrant. And most people are becoming so mad at the tyrant, and yet July 4, 1776, it says there, rebellion to tyrant is what? Obedience to God. Most people don't have the training in the spiritual realm, the training in the Bible. That's why they're so mad, and they're almost in the same, category. They're creating war, they're creating confusion, they're creating division, and the whole world is falling apart. Easy. Yes, that's the tactic of the enemy. You join in with it. That's why I said, thank God we got the training in the spiritual realm, so that when we look at the people, we look at them in the way Jesus look at them. You don't get mad at them. In fact, when I tell people, I pray for George Soros, I pray for Bill Gates, I pray for President Obama and President Biden, they all look at me like, why are you praying for these people? Because Jesus loves them.
That's right.
Then you know what? Then God will hear my prayer. Psalm 66:18. Because God said, if you have anything against your heart, include this is King David, he said he will not hear our prayer. So now we're getting all these facts. I mean, this is the Lord has told us, this is the new perfect beginning of all our new beginnings. Why? He is uprooting the unrighteousness. This is decades, especially since the last, since they removed the Bible, since the 60s, since I was born, 62, 63. And so when all these things are happening in the spiritual realm, God already knew. He is laughing. I can hear him always laugh. Like he is not like shocked that we're in this state. He knew. So I love this because we knew that everything should be put in the earthly realm. That's where our brother Larry, he read the Bible, he read the Quran, he went through all this. And now, as all of us, because one piece, the mosaic solutions of God is coming to the earthly realm. Now, solutions is here. Collapse is here. Collapse of the worldly system and the rising up of the word system. So I'm excited.
No, that's great, Ruth. And you have a good point where it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. It's not money itself. You need money to get by. You got to pay rent. You got to buy Pampers. You got to buy diapers. You got to buy food, right? But it's the love of it. And so, Larry, you talked about the global elite and how they took over our monetary system. So they have all the money they need. When Forbes does the 10 richest people in the world, they fail to mention George Soros. They fail to mention all the other, Rockefellers. It's only celebrities and some names we may or may not know, but they never talk about the true elite who have trillions of dollars and, including Putin, he's got a lot of money himself. So if they have all the money in the world, what motivates our enemy if it's not money? What motivates them?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that because that's what I wanted to talk about next. I want people to understand how important it is that we win this battle. Basically, what the global elite, remember, we talked about the genesis of money starts with what? Natural resources. When I was born, remember I'm old, there were 2 billion people on this planet. Now there's 8 billion. So where did we get climate change? Because the global elite feel like we, what they call useless eaters, are consuming too many of their natural resources, which is the basis of their wealth and their power. And so they want to see to it that there are maybe 500 million of us. So for those of you who don't know, go look up the Georgia Guidestones. In 8 languages, it says that is the goal, to reduce the global population to 500 million. Why do you think we had a pandemic? To reduce the population. Why do you think we have wars? And in addition to the fact that it is a revenue generator, it kills the young men and reduces the population. So basically, they want to have population control because they believe we are consuming their valuable resources. So they're committed to killing not millions, but billions of us. If we don't win this, most of us are not going to be here. So I want to emphasize that for people to let them understand just how significant this is.
Okay, so I think a lot of there's the Guidestones. Why though? So why is our motivation to have, let's say 10% of humanity walking the earth instead of 100% of it? Why? We talked about what?
First of all, they don't want us consuming the oil and the steel and all the natural resources. They want to re-green the earth. That's right in Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 from the UN. They want to basically bring the world back to their definition of utopia, which was a planet that had very few people. There was a lot of natural resources. The animals were abundant. The fish was abundant. Basically, they consider us to be a virus, and they want to get rid of us. And guess what? They couldn't do that until they had the technology that we have today. Now, with the advent of nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and robotics, they don't need us to man their factories like they used to in the past. We're now expendable. We're in the way. We're a virus, and their intention is to kill us so that they can have their definition of utopia. But I want to interject something here that I think relates to something you said a minute ago. In the past, whenever they have orchestrated a collapse, and they orchestrate them, what they do is they expand the money supply. They target you at an investment opportunity in the stock market or the housing market, and then they drive those costs up, and then they pop the bubble and they create a crash, just like we were seeing right now. So they basically drive us into debt, and what they do is they put us in a situation where we feel like we're slaves, and we're beginning to understand and realize that is exactly what we are, and they want to control us, and they want to get rid of us. So I'm losing my train of thought here. Let me go see if I've got a note or two that'll get me back on track.
Yeah, and go ahead. And
go ahead.
I can jump in with a question as well. How is the enemy executing his strategy? I mean, they have all the money in the world, really, from the central banks and the interest that you're talking about. But how are they executing their strategy besides trade and besides interest and central banks? I mean, this is not an easy thing to kill 90% of the population. I mean, it's not easy. And I know there's some things we can't talk about because we're on YouTube. So there's a certain V word or jab word, but you guys get my drift. But how else are they executing their strategy?
That's one way. So let me go back to something we were talking about a minute ago.
Sure.
When we had that collapse in 33, basically all of our governmental facilities, offices were null and void. They embedded in the government of the United States an army of bureaucrats. And those bureaucrats have been writing regulations that undermine the United States of America, and they're attacking us from within. They're undermining us. Then they take their money on the surface and they buy the politicians and they buy the presidents and so forth. And so in all of those collapses that I talked about before, in 29, in 08, they had a bought and paid for president in the office. And he saw to it that when the banks got in trouble and were ready to collapse, they were bailed out. And it was the American people that took the hit. We had to absorb those billions or trillions of dollars. Well, if what I think is going to happen this time, it's a very different scenario. We see the media being exposed, and we see their stocks just plummeting. We see the pharmaceutical industry exposed, and their stocks are plummeting. And Apple, for example, has got one of the largest factories in the world in China, 100,000 people. It's operating at 20% capacity. So China is looking to find a way to outsource away from China. They're going to probably have to choose 4 or 5 different countries in order to do. So what's happening with everything the global elite have done, not realizing God was on our side, it's backfiring on them. So their pandemic is backfiring on them. The breakdown of the global supply chain, caused in part from the pandemic, is backfiring on them. And what's happening now is they have seen to it that there was a shift in power that started with Carter's administration. I saw this when I went over to China. What they did is they went in and they said, we're going to open trade with China. And then they said, we're going to let you into the World Trade Organization and give you preferential status. And then we're going to negotiate a trade contract called NAFTA, which George Bush said was the beginning of the formation of a one world government. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you preferred status. So at that time, under the Carter administration, after 200 years of existence, America had a scant $660 billion debt. That was it. And then once we entered into that intentionally losing trade program with China, our debt doubled and tripled and quadrupled. And today it's $30 trillion. So what's going to happen now? The scenario is going to change because they're going to lose their control of the trade, which is a big piece of that foundation of what makes money. We're going to deglobalize instead of continuing to globalize. We're going to see corporations all over the world that are forced to take at least a portion of their manufacturing out of China. It's going to go to India. It's going to go to the United States. It's going to go to Brazil. It's going to go to several places. That is going to change everything because China has got a whole bunch of problems. And maybe we should do a whole movie, a whole series on just China and why China is going to fall. But when they fall, then everything in the world is going to change. And now I'm going to put my Bible hat on, and I'm going to step away from facts, and I'm going to tell you what I think God has shown me. When that happens, the capitalism is going to fall. Why? Because capitalism is based on constant growth. And if we have a drastic downturn in population, which we're already having, and if we have a financial crisis so people can't consume, capitalism is going to fall. And communism is falling because we see people in the streets by the thousands and hundreds of thousands in Iran, in France, in Britain, in China, in Brazil. The people have said we've had enough. All the lockdowns and all the things they've done have taken the people to where they're done. And so I think we're going to see communist regimes fall. So now the Bible says that the kingdoms of man will fall, and we will usher in a period of peace on earth when the kingdoms of God come in. So what's going to happen, in my opinion? Here's what I think is going to happen. The trade is going to come back. The manufacturing is going to come back from China, be distributed all over the world, and we're going to do something. We're going to retool all of those manufactured goods. And instead of making them so they're designed to self-terminate in a matter of months, we're going to make things that are designed to last forever. For example, in the housing industry, we're going to go away from wood stick-built homes to concrete-built homes. In the auto industry, there's a new battery coming out that's just absolutely revolutionary. We're going to build things that are designed to last. So we're going to go to a kingdom economy that's based on making things that are reusable and that will last forever. And what we're going to do is do something that I guarantee you almost nobody on this watching this has heard of. America rose to power in 34 short years. We superseded England. They had a 300-year head start on us by doing one simple thing. We put tariffs on England so that their goods were too expensive. We developed the Transcontinental Railroad so we could get access to our natural resources. The tariffs forced us to develop our own domestic manufacturing. So we were the innovators of the Industrial Revolution. And then we did something unheard of. We shared that railroad technology with the world. We shared the technology of the Industrial Revolution with the world. And everybody, every nation in the world was rising, and everything was equilibrating. Nations no longer had the reason to fight because people had food. People had a decent standard of living. That system was called the American economic system. And it ended in World War I when the British orchestrated World War I because the system, the American system of economics with the shared resources was causing them major financial pain. And so they caused World War I because we were implementing a network of transcontinental railroads around the world that were going to give all the nations of the world access to the natural resources that they wanted and take the luck of England by controlling trade by sea away from them. And so basically the American system ended like that. But what I think God has in store is he's going to re-implement the American economic system. I call it equalitarianism. And when that happens and the people in Africa have food, when the people in China have a decent standard of living, the cause for war is going to end. And we're going to see a period of unparalleled peace on this planet. And we're going to see a period where we have the latter day rain that's coming in. And we're going to see God just work wonders and miracles because the power of the global elite is going to be snatched right out of their hands. And it's going to happen because this time they don't have the presidents and the leaders and the CEOs in control. And the people who are going to take the hit is they've walked into the traps God planned. Those corporations have invested heavily in China because of the slave labor that's there. And so what happens is now, though they're being forced out of China, so they have to spend millions and millions of dollars to reestablish their manufacturing else around the world. So they're going to collapse. So this time, instead of the burden falling on the American public, it's going to fall on the financiers of the global elite. And we're going to get our freedom back.
And the other reason why I believe the Lord is going to step in is because the global elite are trying to push the book of Revelation too early, right, Ruth? They're trying to push it too early in this country. I know that we're going to be wrapping up right now because it's an hour show. By the way, this is a new regular show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. But to wrap up, I just want to ask you, do you think it's possible, with everything, how infiltrated we are and all the infiltrations they have around the world, do you think it's possible to take the power back, to take back the control?
I don't think it's possible. I think it's absolutely certain.
Ah.
I believe God's orchestrated this. I believe everything they're doing is backfiring on them. And I believe that we know how to defeat them. If we can get control of the money, the very things that they control, and we can do that bottom up, top down strategy that I talked about a minute ago, that's exactly the same thing they did. They want us to believe it's so complicated we can't do it. Here's all there is to it. God showed me. It's very simple. All we have to do is we have to look at our Constitution, and we have to understand that we have about a dozen foundation stones that made America great. We came here so we could have guns. We came here so we could have freedom. We came here so we could have property rights. We came here so that we could have dignity. If we go to our Constitution and look at what needs to be inserted, it's so simple, it's not funny. What they've taken out, we put back in. It's plug and play. If we own the money and we know what has to be put back in, we can fix it in a jiffy. And so I am absolutely convinced that everything that's happening, God is turning the evil of the global elite against them. They're falling into God's trap day by day by day by day.
Right.
They lose, we win, period.
Yeah, and Larry, I like this list that you sent us. Control the necessities of life. Get rid of the shadow government that renders both political parties. It sounds easy. I'm sorry, it sounds hard, but everything, right, Ruth? It seems impossible for man, but everything is possible with God. I mean, the Lord used one man in many times, one woman, Moses. I was able to free, millions of Jews, millions of the Israelites. You have Esther, who was able to stand on behalf of her Jewish people and also the country because of this evil Haman that tried to come in. So you have one person be able to change an entire nation. And how many do we have here that are spirit-filled, that know Jesus, that are bold as a lion, like yourself, Larry, like my friend Nate Kane, who was on my show before. By the way, if you missed that show, I suggest watching it. Former whistleblower Nate Kane talked about revealed even more things happening, behind the scenes. But thank God for bold people like you. But God, used President Trump in an amazing way. And I don't believe he's done. Right, Ruth? There's so much the Lord has shown you. And to wrap this up, and I'm excited for this regular show, by the way. This is going to be really fun. Larry is a plethora of history, information, research. Ruth, why don't you close us out?
Oh, yeah, because first, I'm just going to give you one scripture. Ecclesiastes 2:26. He says, God give wisdom, knowledge, joy. See, to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, most of the global elites that really doesn't know God, because when you put yourself in nothing else, then that's a sin against the word of God. He said he gives what? The work of gathering and collecting, that he may give who is good before God. Okay, so it's also his vanity grasping with the wind. So everything here in this world is temporal. But God, just like Brother Larry, we touch and agree that this is going to be the new perfect beginning of all, and the best of the best. Not just for this country, but for the whole world. In fact, God said there's no more third world country. Because why? The resources that God has given countries will be shared, will be really commonality, to the point like there is no such thing as the communism, the socialism said, let me give you this, and yet they're not really good. They take everything and only give you like a little piece of bread, or not even a bread.
Yeah, a little crumbs.
Yes, a crumbs. But for God's, he give us this. He said, knowledge and wisdom, how to use the resources, how to use the gifts, the talents, everything that God has given all of us individually and corporately as a nation. This is the best. Is the double golden doors for all of us. So the hope is always here. It's coming, and the solutions is going to be really hands-on. And the Lord is raising up people. That's why he's been converging, not just one, just like Anna said, but a group of God's remnant all over the world. And that has been prepared for such a time as this. For me, 60 years. Brother Larry, 75 years. And of course, all of us, as being prepared. But right now, I'm asking everyone, all the viewers, and I'm telling you, whether you believe in God or not, there is a God that is loving and caring to all. To all. So we're
He's
believing
got
that
the whole world in his hands. I love it.
the
He's
whole
got the whole world in
and the
his
whole
hands.
universe. The whole universe, everything.
Amen.
And on it, Psalm 24 and everything like that. So this is so exciting to talk about it. The former he is yesterday, today, and forever, family.
Yes.
All of you that are watching, and of course Anna and Larry, for such a time as this, we are being converged by God to tell the truth, but nothing but the truth. So help us, God. Amen.
In Jesus' name. Well, we will see you guys next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Larry's going to be here. Ruth is going to be here. Once in a while, we'll have even another special guest as well. But Larry, we got to pick that brain because there is so much information that you have, so much research that you have done. And if you guys want to get his book as well, and he didn't ask me to do this, but we're going to put it up anyway, LarryBallard.com. You can purchase his book. I'm telling you, I'm reading it right now. It is fascinating. So much information. So Larry, it's an honor that you are signing up with us regularly. I know Ruth has interviewed you on Rumble. If you guys want to check out Ruth's channel as well, it's called Stand for Righteousness on Rumble. Go check her out there, please. And Larry, we're going to have this just a regular live thing that we're going to do. You guys can also email us any questions you have at freedomwatchershow@protonmail.com so we can have some security with our email system. Proton Mail is amazing. But Larry, it's been an honor. Ruth, thank you so much as well.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
We're excited. I'm already excited for what is Tuesday here yet? Are we going to, I want more.
I'll see you next week. Thanks.
See you guys next week.
Right.
God bless.
Next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Share this broadcast as well. Bye, guys.